Hi, it's Nick Shell with Family Friendly Daddy Blog, again with my special guest, my mom here. I wanted to talk specifically about the fact that the test shows my mother is 2% West African. And to be clear, here's what countries we're talking about. And I'm not pronouncing them right, so forgive me. I can't tell you much about a map of Europe. I'm no better at a map of Africa or pronouncing these countries, but here we go. Benin, Burkina Faso, the island nation of Cape Verde, Gambia, Ghana, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Ivory Coast, Liberia, Mali, Mauritania, Nigeria, the island of St. Helena, Senegal, Sierra Leone, Sao Tome, Principe, and Togo. I have no idea if I'm saying those right, but those are West African countries. 2% of my mom is from that area at some point in time, and which makes me by default arguably 1%. Wanted to talk about that. It's just an interesting concept. You could say, well, that's hardly anything. That doesn't make you African American. Okay, I could easily agree with you on that. However, if you take that one African ancestor out from our family lineage, whenever it was, 1500, 1600, I have no idea. Maybe 1700. I have no idea when that occurred, when that person is in our family tree. But if you take that one person out, we don't exist. You may look at us and say, well, they don't look African at all, 2% or 1%. But we wouldn't exist if it weren't for that. So it was what, 2 weeks ago, I guess, when you found this out. Yes. 2% African. You
Yes.
couldn't exist if it weren't for somebody, a man or a woman somewhere in our heritage, in our family tree that was African. So 59 years old, you find this out. Can you even perceive that you're African? Does that even make sense?
Yes, it does. Yes. I never really thought that I was part African. I never thought that, but when you read it off, it was like, oh, okay, and I'm proud of it because it's part of who I am.
Yeah, it definitely is. Yeah. And something that I think is interesting in America's history, there was this thing going on for a while as far as determining whether someone was African American or not, because there would be maybe a white and an African parent, and then they're a mixed race, and especially in American history, the dark side of history that we're all aware of, there was this concept, well, is that child black or are they white? So eventually America kind of came to this general understanding of, and this was never necessarily law as much as it was a code and understanding at one point in American history. Well, if you're 1% African, then you're black, you're African American, even if you're just one drop, is what they would say, one drop. Well, it's interesting because as literal as possible, I'm one drop, my mom is 2 drops. So now granted, we figured that the African ancestor came through the Italian side.
Yes.
So, because the Italian side was actually more Middle Eastern and Jewish, and it looks like based on the map, that's where it happened. It couldn't happen from the Mexican side.
And then the family members, they were several family members had the 2% as well.
Right. Then that's how we determined it wasn't from the Mexican side.
Yes.
Okay.
We knew for a fact. Yeah.
So it's interesting. So granted, your ancestors came here about a little over 100 years ago.
Yes.
Which was after post-Civil War times. It was about 100 years ago. So maybe this whole 1% drop rule wasn't so much in effect, or people weren't aware of it back then. But just imagine though, in theory, if we were in a time machine and went back to 1870 in America, in the South, and anyone knew this and could prove it, we're African American by that coding. And so it's very interesting how people have struggled to figure out what exactly is African American. Well, again, I'm not claiming to be African American, but at the same time, I'm not denying that if you take out the ancestor, we're no longer existing. We're no longer human beings with that one ancestor somewhere along that got in the mix, whether it was mixed in with the Middle Eastern, which I think is very likely, actually. When you look at a map and look at how Africa and the Middle East are so close to each other, I think that's very possible at some point in history. So here's celebrating the fact that we are 1 drop, 2 drops African. Very proud of that. We wouldn't exist without that. Proud to be of African descent, even if it's just a little bit.